Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 76 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today we hear from Rachel Scott, a yoga teacher, educational designer, and an expert on creating and facilitating a yoga teacher training. If we talk about a link or something in this episode, you are going to find all of those links and a summary of all of the topics in the show notes. If you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/76, all of that is there for you. So you can do whatever it is that you do when you're listening to podcasts. I know I love to be out in the garden, cleaning, getting ready in the morning. If you have a moment, take a quick screenshot of what you're doing, take a quick photo and tag me in it and tell me if you're listening to the podcast and show me what it is that you're doing. I love to see those. Another huge thing today, and I just want to tell you on a personal note, this is really crazy to think forward to this day. So 20 years ago, my first child was born as you listen to today's episode, if you're listening to it in real time. So this is the big day for our family where we switch from having 3 teenagers to one who's going to be 20 years old, my oldest son, Wyatt. And he has been such a light in my life. He has been one of my biggest teachers. I want to give a big shout out to him, and he knows that his mom's a big softie, so I'm going to do my best not to cry through this, but it's just every single moment when we visit, I just feel such pride as a mom that he has really dug in and become his own person and found the things that he loves to do and found the interests that he has, even when they're very different from my interests. He is a welder. He works in a machine shop. He's putting together a truck. He has skills that I have no idea about. He tells me about work, about cylinders, and all kinds of things. And I do my best to learn what he's talking about. And it's just really fun to have children who are just going to grow into different beings than you would maybe hang around. He knows that I hang around with a lot of yoga teachers, and none of them are talking about what kind of welding they do. Not yet, anyway. So huge happy birthday. I love you, Wyatt. Thanks for keeping me on my toes as a mom. Thanks for bringing me through all those fun teen years that were sometimes really not fun for either one of us because neither one of us knew what we were doing. And I feel like you paved the way well for your siblings, and I'm excited to see and to watch your journey. Okay, connected yoga teachers, look at that. I made it through without crying in that, which is kind of a miracle. I cry at YouTube videos and commercials. Just ask my kids. Let's get back into today's episode. Speaking of learning, I want to know, what was your first 200-hour yoga teacher training like? If you can think back for a moment, did that teacher training fit your learning style? Did you learn all you needed to know to teach a yoga class? Did you feel prepared and ready to teach? How would you have improved something about your yoga teacher training if you had the power to go back there and to look at what would serve you better and your learning style? Are you currently teaching a yoga teacher training that you'd like to improve on for the next time you lead it? Or are you thinking about creating a yoga teacher training to help other yoga teachers or to boost your revenue? For those who don't know me, my name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of 3, a yoga teacher, and a consultant for yoga teachers. I get how isolating it can feel as a yoga teacher and an entrepreneur. I remember what it was like to come out of my first 200-hour yoga teacher training, and it prepared me for so much, and yet I still felt like I'd been dropped into this wilderness of yoga learning. I had more to learn about yoga and a lot to learn about business. I believe that when yoga teachers create a sustainable and profitable business, they are able to offer consistent yoga out into the world. I want to see yoga teachers generating profit so they can afford to take more training, take some time off, have that money for self-care, and continue to teach and not have to move to a different job. I know many yoga teachers who facilitate teacher training as a source of revenue, and this is why I wanted to invite Rachel Scott today to talk to us on the podcast so that we can find out and we can ask ourselves, are we ready to lead a yoga teacher training? What would it take? How can we build up to that? How can we improve an existing yoga teacher training, or what are the steps needed to look at creating one? This episode today is really the foundation if you're thinking about creating a yoga teacher training. If you have a yoga teacher friend who is thinking about a yoga teacher training, please send this episode to them. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher entrepreneur. Every week, between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending, you can connect to information, ideas, and a supportive community of other yoga teachers. I am blown away by the support, the questions, the ideas that I get from our Facebook group. It's called the Connected Yoga Teacher Group, and any yoga teacher can join. We have over 3,000 yoga teachers in there now. It is amazing the questions that you guys ask. You really make me think. The comments, the feedback, the support, it is like a huge light for me when I go in there. I go in there a lot, and I actually have to look at time blocking my time because I just get wrapped right into that. So if you feel the same way, you can do what I do. I put it on my calendar, Facebook group time, and that basically usually means the Connected Yoga Teacher group. There are a few other groups that I love to be in. And I go in there, I look for questions that I feel like I can help with, or I post questions and block that time off on my calendar so that I'm not in there all day when I need to be doing things like making podcasts and doing my accounting and all of the things of running my yoga business. Before we dive in, let's hear from Emily over at Schedulicity with our hot tip of the week.
Hey there, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Emily with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. When you create and market yoga teacher training through Schedulicity, we can help you capture your students' impulse to book. Once you've created your workshop, it's a great idea to enable the payment add-on and choose to collect a deposit, full prepayment, or a credit card number at the time of online booking. This way, that money will go into your bank account when a client books, or if they don't show up, you can charge them based on the no-show policy you've created. Knowing that payment is taken care of allows you to put all of your mental energy into helping your students become the next generation of excellent teachers.
Thank you so much, Emily and Schedulicity rock stars. Let's dive in and meet Rachel. Rachel Scott is a teacher of teachers based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. British Columbia is really one of my favorite provinces for so many reasons. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend that you visit. It has mountains and ocean all at once, and it's pretty fantastic over in BC. Rachel is passionate about how a yoga teacher training is designed. That is why her main work is about supporting yoga teachers and studios to create and deliver amazing yoga teacher trainings. Rachel has worked in education for nearly 20 years. She has worked at one of Canada's largest yoga studios, Yoga Works, leading yoga teacher training for over 7 years. Rachel has authored 2 books, and she writes for her award-winning blog as well as many other publications. She describes herself as part nerd, part creative artist. Rachel believes in elevating strengths, laughing out loud, and taking a few deep breaths. At the end of today's interview, I will be here to summarize and offer my key takeaways. A really interesting side note, and maybe a different way to think about advertising your yoga offerings if you have some good photographs. I actually met Rachel and I talked to her about this in the interview. I was online looking for stock images for the 5-day content creation challenge that I ran a while ago. You can still join it if you want to. The information is on our homepage. I'll put a link in the show notes. So when I was on Pixabay is what I was using, I saw a photo by Rachel and followed the link back to her website. And that's when I got really curious because I saw she was helping people with yoga teacher training. I reached out, and this is how this interview happened. So maybe you have some amazing photographs and you want to start to put them up on Pixabay. Just make sure that it links back to your website and you might find some new people. Let's dive in and meet Rachel Scott. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Rachel. It is fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I feel like I got to know you through a photograph. I saw you.
Which photo was that?
I know. If that hasn't intrigued our listeners, I don't know what will. So it was a photograph maybe on Pixabay. Do you have photos on Pixabay?
Oh, I do. Yeah, I uploaded a whole bunch on there. I love Pixabay. They're so great for stock photos. So as kind of a reciprocity, I thought, hey, I'll upload some yoga photos for them. Yeah.
Well, I love it because I used one in a content creation challenge. It was like the cover photo. You have a computer in front of you, and it's just a really fun and nice photo. And then I thought, hey, I'm going to check out your website, because when I was scrolling through the photos, it looked like you were a yoga teacher. And then that brought me to your website. And then I thought, now I need to reach out for a podcast interview. So.
All from Pixabay. Thanks, Pixabay.
What I wanted to ask you today was about looking at doing a yoga teacher training. But before we get there, how did you become passionate about this topic of yoga teacher training in the first place?
Oh, yeah. I've always been an education nerd. I love education. I love learning. And, like many of us, one of the things that I love about yoga is its infinite depth. The infinite depth of study that you can have with it. It's just so fun. But I went to Columbia undergrad, and that was obviously a very academic setting, and very rigorous and super fun. And after that, I used to teach, like I used to tutor and things like that. And then I was actually in the arts for a while and got my MFA. And then I was a teacher in conservatory. And so teaching and creating curriculum has always been part of my world, although I didn't specifically study it until recently. And then, like many of us, I did yoga and I thought, this is amazing. I want to dive into this completely. And of course, being a total nerd, I took as many trainings as I could. And I became the director of Teachers College for Y Yoga, which is Canada's largest corporately owned yoga company. And so I had started to become a teacher trainer with YogaWorks because, being passionate about yoga, I wanted to learn as much about it as I possibly could. And I thought, well, the way to do that is to actually be involved in the teacher trainings, because that kind of hothouse environment where we ask all the big questions and we study the texts and everybody dives inwards. I just wanted to be surrounded by that more. And so when I became the director for Y Yoga, I knew that one of my tasks was going to be to create their program. So 200 hour, 300 hour, to also oversee things like their yin and their hot training, and then also creating programming around all of their kind of niche specialties that they offer. And so that was amazing and a big job. But I also thought, after I did that, okay, I've sort of hacked my way through creating these massive courses, and they're not half bad. But then I spent several years, going back, revising it, making it better, thinking about how I can improve this 200-hour experience that I've created. And I thought, you know what, there are people who know how to do this from the get-go. And I kind of looked around at the yoga world, and I was taking an online course with a teacher that I absolutely love, because online education is obviously becoming really huge now. Mm-hmm. And the course just wasn't great. So I don't know if you've had a chance to take online courses with your teachers, but sometimes they're really bad, and the teachers are amazing.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah. And you're like, why is this course absolutely so sucky and uninteresting? And so when I studied with my teacher in person, he's amazing, but then the online course just flopped. And I thought, you know what, as online and education is becoming, it's becoming so much of a bigger part of our world, I thought, how can I use my background and my skill set actually to help us all improve this world and do it better? And so I went back to school and I actually got my master's in instructional systems and learning technology, which is a fancy way of saying like, okay, how do you create really awesome education? And then how can we also leverage our new online tools to create community and to do it even better? And so that led me to leaving my job at Y Yoga, which was awesome. I was there for 8 years, but to leave that behind and become a consultant so that what I can do is help people create lesson plans and, create excellent education that's really engaging and interesting and uses the tools and the techniques and the concepts that now we know so much about, to use that to share their passion with the world. Because I thought, I want to be this bridge between this amazing teacher that I had who has so much knowledge, but couldn't teach it well. I want to be that bridge for him so that he can actually share what he knows effectively, and he can do that in person. And then I can also help people to leverage that for the online world because it's different. And you need to have some tools in your kit to do that particular kind of beast well. You can't just with a lot of teachers, they can get away with stuff by going into a classroom and just being so wonderful and interacting. But in online, you don't have that. You have to actually structure and plan things. And it has to be like a really good learning experience. So I thought, I'll bring the structure, you bring the passion, and together we'll make an awesome education baby, was basically my thought.
That's amazing. So when did that transition happen?
Oh, just recently. I finished my master's last June and I left my job December 31st.
Okay. So this is a new thing.
I know, it's so exciting. And I'm still, I'm still teaching my public classes. I still am faculty. I'm actually teaching in the next 200 hours that Y Yoga is doing back in Vancouver. So I'm still part of their community, but I wanted to take myself out of the director position. Yeah. And I've been doing this the last few months, which has been really cool.
I think it's nice that you're also still teaching community classes and still involved in a YTT, because that really will continue to inform, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have to be in the trenches to know what people are really dealing with.
I can also hear how passionate you are about YTTs and kind of getting into that learning piece. And I hear what you're saying in terms of, I've even read a book from a yoga teacher, and I really connected with the book and decided to take an online course. And then I was disappointed. I felt like, okay, I read the book and now this is going to expand things more. And it was pretty dry. And it's my learning style. Like other people, I'm sure, resonated with it and were able to learn better than I was. So
maybe, or maybe not, I think to be a great teacher, you have to figure out ways to reach your student, and this is the thing. Okay. I'm going to just slightly rant here.
Yes.
But now that online education is becoming so ubiquitous, what drives me absolutely crazy is when I see sales masquerading as education. When I see people just trying to build revenue and, throw something out there and create passive income for themselves without actually really, really letting their first priority be how is the student learning? What am I helping them to do? And it's just I see so much online stuff build your online course, create passive revenue, I earn 6 figures in a month, all this ridiculous stuff, which is so not about what the learning experience I think should be, which should start with, what do I actually want to help people do? And when we start with that, that's when the head's in the right place, not let me create. I mean, God bless yoga teachers. We need other forms of income. I'm working the business side. I totally get that. And I want to support people to do it and do it well, but we have to start with the right intention.
Right. And that is, like you're saying, to bring something like, what am I going to teach people, instead of saying, how am I going to afford my rent? Right.
Yeah. Legitimate question, but yeah, exactly.
Right. It shouldn't be the foundation of your course, though. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. So who really, first of all, who do you work with? Do you work mostly with people who are planning an in-person training or an online training?
Yeah, it's a combination actually of both. And I work with, right now, most of my clients are either creating their own courses. So several of them are doing 200 hours, 300 hours. Some are starting from scratch. And then some clients are actually already have a program, but they kind of go, this isn't as good as it could be. and I want it to be really good. Like they've run it a few times or many times in one case, but have recognized that it's not as good as it could be. Also, how do I get other people to teach this course? Like one of my clients wants to expand and actually have other trainers come in and teach her material. And yet it's kind of like, okay, so how do I create the materials and the resources for someone else to come in and hold the reins of this with integrity? So those are some of the problems that we kind of work together to solve. Some of them are, yeah, really, right. And then some of it is online. It's actually really fun for me because I'm creating online, a big online course right now, which is how to create a teacher training. So, because I want to take people through a process of, it's basically like, how can I give you all the strategies and tips that I've learned and do it in a really cost-effective way? Because consulting with me is great, but sometimes that's pricey for people. And I wanted to be able to share this information in a way that would be really effective for people to dig into and go back and use so that they can create their own trainings in a way that's really, effective and engaging and also represents them. Yeah.
Yeah. So how should people, so a big question in my mind, we just heard from Kim Stark in a previous episode, and she had written a blog article which resonated so well with so many of our listeners. It was a really popular episode, and it was her article was titled, "What the World Needs Now Is Not Another Yoga Teacher." And her side of this was, not another, instead of another 200-hour yoga teacher training, let's look at how we can have a yogi training. So maybe some people are studying but not learning how to be yoga teachers. And then, so that's one side of it, kind of the flood of the market. But I guess another is, I know some very experienced yoga teachers who have been teaching for, say, 20 plus years, and they feel like they're not ready to lead a yoga teacher training. And then I know some people who are brand new out of their 200-hour yoga teacher training.
I know,
and
right?
Starting a yoga teacher training. And so I want to know your take on this. Like, how do people know when they're ready to create a teacher training?
I think if you feel ready, you should be cautious because I don't think you are, you know what I mean? So for people who feel like, 2 years out of my 200-hour and it's going to be awesome for me to create a teacher training, I would say exercise some caution there. Not that they can't do that, but I don't know that when we take on a great project, that there shouldn't be some trepidation and some fear and self-doubt. I think that's part of it. So trepidation and fear and self-doubt should not dissuade someone from doing it. Like those teachers who've been teaching for 20 plus years and don't feel ready, I'd say that should not be a barrier to you sharing your knowledge. So I don't think we ever feel ready. I think fear is often an indication of something that we're passionate about but scared to move through. So that's not an emotional barrier like that is not actually an appropriate reason to not do it, I don't think.
Okay.
So I think that instead we really have to think about, one, does it align with who I am and what I want to do as a yoga teacher? The skills to teach a teacher training and to help other people learn to teach, that's very different than being a group class instructor. It's very different. It's a whole different way of holding space for people because it's not about you anymore. It's about the students. And so it requires, first of all, a passion for the educational process and helping other people to really shine. And not everybody needs to do that. Like there is this idea, and I think because you're right, the market is saturated with 200-hour teacher trainings. And because it is saturated, we have this idea that everyone's supposed to create a teacher training, which I don't think is true. It's kind of the myth of retreats. Like, oh, we all do retreats and, it's like not true. So I think it's really important for teachers to step back and first go back to what is my personal mission as a yoga teacher? Like this is something teachers should do every year is like kind of come back and go like, all right, how am I serving? How am I serving my students? How do I want to serve the world? How am I participating in this? How am I using the skills and knowledge that I have to do what I want to in the world, to make this my work? And for some people, it'll be like, no, I'm a great yoga teacher because of my group classes. I'm a great yoga teacher because I do these really in-depth workshops, or I share the chakras, or I share this particular meditation technique. And some people will be retreats, and then some people will be like, no, I'm passionate about education and being in that process. So I think the first thing is to get out of the mindset that everybody needs to create a teacher training, because like you really, really don't. And they become places. I mean, most of the yoga teacher trainings, unfortunately, that I think are out there, I shouldn't say I don't really have a percentage of this, because obviously there's so many I don't know, but I think a lot of them are just are experiences. So they're kind of like actually not teaching people to teach. It's kind of like a place that you go and you do a practice and you dive in, but most people are doing it for themselves, and they're not actually learning how to teach other people. They're kind of going and having this experience, which might be very valuable and very exciting and emotionally fulfilling, but it doesn't actually teach them to teach. And so I think if you want to do that, that's something else, So, So I'd say if you're thinking about it, first step back, look at your mission as, what is my voice in the world as a yoga teacher? And do I want education to be a part of it? And if so, like, there's so many ways to do education, workshops, immersions. Is that what I'm interested in? Or am I interested in teaching people how to stand and hold space in a room for other people?
Right. And how do we know? And is there this point of gearing up to that? Like, is there a way to kind of test the waters instead of putting together, say, a 200-hour yoga teacher training?
Absolutely. I think I'm doing smaller programs, doing like workshops. Mm-hmm. Weekend immersions are great ways to test your appetite for holding space in that particular way. And also, I think those are great. And also, one note about what you said about the saturation, and the world doesn't need another yoga teacher training. Most of the students who come and have done my teacher trainings, I'd say 60% of them, 70% of them, don't want to teach. They're doing it because they love yoga. Now, once they get through our training, sometimes they turn around and they say, I didn't realize I could do this, and now I really want to share this as a teacher. But I'd say that most people aren't going to yoga teacher trainings to actually learn to be teachers. So I think there is space out there, absolutely, for continuing education for serious practitioners. Mm-hmm. And that could be a great thing to put together for people.
Yeah, that's what really came out of that episode with Kim Stark. Was we heard from some teachers who have an existing like yogi training. It's not to teach, but it was really to dive in and experience yoga and learn more about it without the teaching component. And I think there is a real market there that's not being utilized, like you said.
Yes. Yeah. And lots of opportunity to share things that way.
Yeah. So we kind of got into, often I hear from teachers, who am I to teach that? So you've touched on, what, if you feel that fear and that hesitation, that's probably a really good and healthy thing, instead of just being like, yes, I am all knowing.
One of the reasons to teach is to learn.
Right.
When you have to teach something, you learn it so much more, and to not expect that you have to have all the answers. I'm not sure where that idea came from. It's like, it's beautiful to be exposed as not knowing something, because then you get to go to your teachers or go to resources. There's so many resources, and say, what's the answer to this? Like, I taught so much anatomy, and it was always, I had physios in my trainings and doctors and chiropractors, and I absolutely love anatomy, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physio. I'm not a chiro. But I would welcome those opportunities if there was anything that I didn't know, because it became a further opportunity to learn. And I think and also sometimes we put too much pressure on us. We have this like kind of guru culture in yoga, but now education is really more increasingly less about the sage, called the sage on the stage, this expert getting up and lecturing to people. That actually isn't a great way for people to learn to do stuff. It's interesting. But now it's about, how do I create an environment that can facilitate learning and have the students, use their own resources, and I can give them information that is going to really help them to shine. So it's a bit of a switch. And I think I think it's very appropriate to take the responsibility seriously, but not to let that not to let a lack of knowledge or a fear of not knowing enough yet to stop you, because that's one of the whole reasons to teach, is to actually be a great student.
Mm-hmm. I love how you brought that in, this not needing to know everything as soon as you sit in front of people, but you're there to teach them how to learn this. And this certain thing that you have, that makes a big difference. Can you think of an example to really root that? So in a yoga teacher training, instead of standing in front of everyone, telling them something, how would you bring it in so that they're learning something?
Oh, sure. I mean, people need to actually do things. So I'll share one of my secrets, which is once you hear it, you're like, oh, of course that makes sense. But this is what I call the great mistake. And this is exactly the great mistake that I made when I first created a training, was to go up there and think that I had to share what I knew, which is just partly how we sort of think. I think I'm going to go up, I'm going to stand in front of the classroom, and I'm going to tell them what I know. But that actually doesn't help the student do anything differently. It might be fascinating, interesting. It's like watching a TED Talk. Amazing, right? They're so great. But when we want actually students to do something. So instead, I might go up there, like let's say I'm teaching sequencing, for example. I'm not going to just go up there and tell them all about how they sequence. I may go up there and I may do something with sequencing. I may tell them a little something about them, but then I actually want them to participate and say, like I start off a lot of my lesson plans with group discussions and brainstorms, because then students start to realize actually how much they already know. And so I want them to be interactive. And then instead of me just saying like, here's a sequence, I might say like, okay, here you guys brainstorm together, you create this, and then we come back and we work on it together, so that they're actually doing something and practicing something, not just hearing me talk about everything that I might know about it. They get to actually use their own knowledge in the moment, and also to create an environment where people can make mistakes. And so I might give them some tools or some examples, and then they do it, and we look at it, and then they do it again. So it's more of a practice. It's more of them actually doing things rather than just kind of like hanging out and listening. Lectures are great, but that's not going to teach people how to teach.
Right. Oh, that's such a good example. I love it. I was just in a YTT weekend. It's a prenatal yoga teacher training, facilitating that. And one of the, like 3 or 4 people in the group came out to me and they were asking a question that I felt like was more backing up to a 200 hour. It was around like putting a class series together and then actually mapping out class, like what's involved in the class. And we hadn't planned on doing it, but I was like, let's all brainstorm. We've got some really experienced teachers in here, some brand new teachers. Let's put it all together, what that looks like. So it was a really powerful thing because, like you said, yoga teachers have a lot of knowledge. They don't always know that they do.
Yes. And yoga students also have years of practice under their belt. So, invariably when I talk about, and then we'll just say with the sequencing example, like I go and I say, what are some things you need to consider when you're sequencing? Or what does a well-sequenced class feel like? Or what are the different parts of it? Invariably, they can come up with the answers to that. They're like, oh, I guess you should think about, what time of day it is, or, what the student's level is and all this stuff. So it's like they actually, as practitioners, they already know a lot more than they may give themselves credit for. And that's really fun too.
Mm-hmm. So when, say someone's feeling like, okay, I'm really considering putting a teacher training together. What are what's the downside of this? What are the dangers of creating a teacher training, or kind of we know the pros? We're learning, we're increasing our income, we're sharing, and we can kind of spread this, whatever we're sharing goes a little further, ripples out. What are the downsides?
The downsides to creating a teacher training. That's interesting. Well, they take a lot of time. You got 180 hours in the classroom for a 200-hour training. And if you're doing it well, it should probably take you at least 600, probably 500 hours of time to create all that content. So if you're doing it right, it can be very time consuming to create all of that content and to do it well. It's so funny. I haven't really thought about what the downsides are. I mean, there are pitfalls to avoid, I'd say, when you're actually teaching it. But I mean, do you have something in mind? Like, can you give me an example from your side of things?
I feel like that got into the biggest thing that I learned right away was the putting a teacher training together before. Like when someone asked me, how long did it take you to put Mama Nurture together? I was like, I think it was about 10 years.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
the real answer. Like it was 8 years of me studying only for my own curiosity and keeping this binder full of prenatal, postnatal information. And then someone asked me, like, can you teach that? Maybe.
Yes.
Let me see. And now I need another year or two and I still revise that. So I think that's a really important point about that time piece to it.
Yeah. And that's creating, I mean, in the industry, if you're creating 1 hour of content is usually going to be anywhere between, I'd say 4 hours and 10 hours to create. So, I mean, when I did the 200 hour, it was similar to your experience creating your prenatal training. It was like I created it, sure, in probably 4 months, but then it was probably 3 years of revisions and until it got to a place where it felt like, okay, now we're there. And so that's why I want to help people with my course, hopefully do it we do the process backwards, honestly, when we're creating as teachers. And I want to help people do the process in the best way, so the most streamlined way. So it's like we can create it once and then the revisions, it's not like, oh my gosh, I have to revise this thing so much. We start in as if we've already done it for a year, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, it makes sense to really have someone who knows the process of it and knows what it's like to teach something. I mean, you would be able to look at a plan and then say, now how are you going to, not just be sitting there and feeding them full of information. This gets into two questions of mine. One teacher that I was working with this week was talking about what to charge then. So she's been asked to be part of a 200-hour yoga teacher training. Has a really special niche. She's a psychologist and specializes in trauma-informed yoga. And so she's been pulled into this yoga teacher training. But she was saying, like, how much do I charge? She knows it's going to be a lot of prep work.
Yeah, it is. But once she creates it, this is the thing about creating your own material. I mean, and there's lots of things that you have to think about in terms of copyright when you're creating a teacher training. Just as a side note to our listeners, like if you're a teacher creating a training, you have to recognize that you only own what you create. So if you create a teacher training, but then you outsource all the anatomy, if that person walks away, that's not your material anymore, right? So for your friend who works in trauma, it's once she creates it, it's going to be a lot of work for her. But once she's created that, it would be wise for her to think about, like, okay, can I leverage this for other 200-hour trainings or 300-hour trainings or a weekend training? I don't know how many hours she's got in there, but it's like once she creates that material, if she does it well, then she can reuse that. And so it's an initial, whenever you're creating a training, the initial outlay of time is incredibly heavy, incredibly onerous, but you can't charge based on that, because now the idea is that once you've got that, you can run that another 10 times, right? Or you could run it 3 times a year, or twice a year, something like that. So she shouldn't charge as much as it costs her to create it, because the idea is that she owns it and she can reuse it. Mm-hmm. If we could talk brass tacks in terms of the finances of teacher trainings too, if you'd like. Sure.
If you have anything to offer in terms of, I mean, I know it's difficult because each area is different, but if you have anything to offer in that regard, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So what I see, based on my experience working in a few different companies, I mean, it does vary place to place. Most teacher trainings tend to clock in with a tuition for 200-hour at around $3,000.
Yes.
Somewhere in there, right? Some might be a little less, some might be a little bit more, but unless you were doing Bikram, I think, which was some insane amount. But that's about how much a 200-hour is. And if you're faculty, it kind of depends. Like if it's your training, most trainings do, like if I'm partnering with a studio or whatever, most of the times it would, like I'm coming in to say I create a teacher training, I'm going to a studio, I'm going to present it there. We would do a revenue share Usually if you're lucky as a trainer, it's 70-30, where if it's my training, my content, I get 70% of the revenue, the studio gets 30 after expenses. So it's kind of like, okay, how much did the rooms cost? How much did the materials cost? How much did the marketing cost? Take that off the top, and then we're going to revenue split the rest of it. So that could be a partnership that you do. If I have a big training, but I'm just bringing in some ringers, like I'm just bringing in someone to I like to teach the anatomy myself, but say I wanted to bring in someone to teach anatomy, or I wanted to bring in someone to teach philosophy or someone to teach trauma, I would pay them an hourly for their time. And that hourly could be anywhere on the low side of things, it would be like $50 an hour. On the high side of things, it would be $125, $150 an hour.
Right.
So it's quite a spread depending on how big the training is and who you're working for.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. This is just on a personal note, I go in and teach as part of a 200-hour, I'll teach a 3-hour introduction to prenatal yoga and pelvic health. And I charge $100 an hour Canadian. So that's right in that range.
$4 American.
I know. No.
I know. I was like, yeah, 75 US. I know. It's funny though, because you start thinking about these international things. Anyways.
Yes. And I think part of that, in my mind, I know that I also then offer Mama Nurture, the prenatal training at that same studio. So we get some carryover. I get in front of people for 3 hours. I get paid for it. And then a lot of the time they'll sign up for our course.
Yes, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what other things? Oh, I know what my other question was. It is in terms of time. We know like there's lots of discussion around how long a 200-hour yoga teacher training should be. You know, people are upset about intensives. Other people love them. My question though is like an average day, how much content can people take in a day? You know, I know from teaching that you just kind of see them at times like, oh, you know, maybe right before lunch, everybody's starting to really slow down. They need food. They need a break. Mm-hmm. But what do you think works for an average day?
Yeah, I would probably max it out at 8 or 9 hours. I think you can help mitigate against long days by structuring your days really well. So, for example, I always put the practice before lunch. You know, so if there's an internal practice, that's right. It makes sense. People, that's when people like you, if you're doing like a meditation practice to start off, and then any of the lectures should also become, again, like more like activities and more interactive, and people get on their feet and they move around, and then a practice before lunch. And then you come back and do a recap. And if there's like practice teaching, et cetera, that can basically bring you through the end of the day. And in a yoga teacher training, it's actually great because we can be on our feet so much and we can be interacting so much. But even just getting everybody to like move into small group work or to change their position in the room can really help to keep our bodies moving and keep people alive and awake. So in that case, I think you can get away with longer days, but I also feel like you have to be smart. If you're doing an intensive, like the one I'm doing in July, it's basically, what is it? It's like we have basically a 20-day training or something like that. You also have to be smart about how you pace your content through the course and ensure that there's lots of repetition of key ideas. So like one and done is not going to do it. I used to say, well, I told them that. Don't they remember? But I said it. No. It's like, that's my own arrogance. I was like, well, I said it to you guys. Why didn't you get it? It's like, people don't get things from hearing it once. You actually have to have them like say it, do it, redo it, get feedback, do it again. And so, when you're doing a 200-hour, the time actually goes so fast. If you want them to really learn and not just like throw a wall of content at them, if you want them to really learn and integrate and teach, actually it's a very short amount of time because they need to practice so much.
Mm-hmm. So it's so true.
Right.
I remember assisting the very first 200-hour yoga teacher training that I assisted. I was the demo person in the middle. And then I remember on break being like, but what about this? What about this? Are we going to teach them this and this and this? And I remember the people leading the 200-hour very patient with me. And they were just like, I know you get really excited about sharing as much as possible. We have to give them the basics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to make those really solid. So that was some smart advice for sure.
Yeah. I
I have to watch that myself. I really have to rein it in. Like, okay, we'll just, they'll learn that down the road. Sometimes I like to throw things in, but
so excited though, right? So
yeah.
fun.
So what do you see as something that could improve current 200-hour or any yoga teacher training, let's say? What are some of the key components that you feel are kind of missing, or what would make a yoga teacher training even better?
Even more better.
Yeah, more better.
I think for every piece of content that you're presenting. So if I'm going in and I'm teaching a lesson, it's like you have to know what your learning objectives are. And people are a little confused about learning objectives because they think, okay, I want the student to know how to sequence. That's like so vague. It doesn't actually say anything to me about what I'm going to do. So for every lesson plan that you go into, I would say, hey, all you teachers out there who are listening, write out, like, what do I want the student to be able to do and demonstrate and show me as a result of this particular learning? And so, and how am I going to measure that? How am I going to actually witness them doing that? Because if I'm like, oh, I want them to know sequencing, there's no way that I can test that, right? Oh, do you know it? Yes. I don't know. So you have to say, like, well, how are they going to show me their skills? Like, so maybe it's, at the end of this lesson with me, students are going to be able to create the opening sequence for a hatha class, or, at the end of this, they are going to demonstrate to me that they know the different factors that go into sequencing. Or at the end of this, they are going to demonstrate to me that they understand the risk to the meniscus of the knee by teaching pigeon pose in a very safe and effective way. So that we can start to, just by that simple act of saying, what do I want the student to be able to do as a result of this? And being clear about what you're going for, that can actually transform so much, because it takes all of this sort of theoretical stuff and makes it super practical and applicable and about the student and about what they are learning and what they can do. And then you know what your problems are. Like then you know where the gaps are too. If a student can't do what you expect them to be able to do, then you have some place to start to really help them to bridge the gap.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that makes all of the difference. And it might seem really simple, like you said, but to write it down, I think, is a key piece of that. So you can write it out really specifically. What are they going to be able to do? I remember Janelle Allen talking about online courses, and she said something very similar as well.
Yes, online courses can be very well, and the tricky thing about online courses too is that students learn through feedback. So, an online course, this was part of my earlier rant, but people think, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm going to put it out there, but there's no way to check if your students are actually learning. I think the best online courses are courses that are mediated by the teacher, where there's like an interaction that happens, or there's accountability. It's not just the student learning and hoping that they get what you mean, because students will take in things different ways. So like, it's not enough to just create a course and put it out there and say, like, okay, everybody take it. I think the best courses are when you have your teacher who, like, weekly check-ins, or you have to submit to me an assignment, and I can give you feedback and make sure that you're actually learning. Because if they're not learning, then what's the point?
Yeah, that is so true. I feel like I kind of learned that the hard way with online teaching. And I was teaching them live. And really the questions from people informed me in terms of, because they could ask questions live. And I really encourage that. I always feel like when I hit a point where no one's asking questions, I'm not doing my job.
That's scary. It's like when there's crickets, you're like, uh-oh, what's happening?
Yeah. It's kind of I know I've hit a place of overwhelm or something. Like, it's always a chance to reevaluate. Okay, let's look at that part again. That's amazing. So if people want to work with you in terms of online taking your course or one-on-one, how can they do that? Where do they find you?
Yes. Well, you can just pop on over to my site. It's called rachelyoga.com. So RACHEL YOGA. And on there, I've got, there's lots of options. So I think the best way to start off, if you're kind of contemplating working with me or interested or want to know more about whether or not I can help, is to just book a free 15-minute chat with me. I think as yoga teachers, we need to be frugal. And so it's good to know what exactly you'll get out of a service before I think you jump on the train. So, just have a chat and we'll see if I can help out. If you know that you're going to create a whole teacher training and, that's on your bucket list and you might be nervous or scared, but you want to do it, you might also consider doing my online course. So it's a 12-week course, and it basically takes you start to finish through everything that you need to know to create a teacher training as efficiently as possible. And right now I'm running the pilot course of it, and then I'm going to, kind of improve it, revise it, and I'll launch the next one, I think, in September. And so if you know that you want to create a program, if it's an immersion, also if it's one that's for students and not even for teacher training, it doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher training course, but if it's, I would say, for a longer form course where you just want to make sure that you're really, creating it super well and giving people what they really want out of it, then maybe check that out, because that is a really kind of cost-effective way to get a lot of information kind of in one place. And then the other thing that I do for people is I write curriculum. So I've written an anatomy curriculum, which includes all of the trainer notes and the Google Slides, which are PowerPoint, and all the student handouts for the anatomy portion for either a 200-hour teacher training or an immersion. Because what I find is that a lot of times trainers are intimidated by, they feel I can teach the teacher training, but I'm sort of scared about teaching the anatomy portion of it. And because I'm such an anatomy nerd, and I've been doing it for so long, I thought I really want to create materials that support trainers to teach them this themselves, because we've chatted about, when you teach something, you know it better. And I love anatomy being really integrated through a teacher training course rather than just plunked on a weekend when a specialist can come in. You know how that kind of happens. They're like, here's your anatomy weekend, and it's 16 hours of anatomy, and everybody's eyes roll back into their heads, and it doesn't really, yeah. I've been in those courses, and you're like, I don't remember anything. I know what a femur is, I have no idea how this relates. So I created these, all these different modules so that trainers can just plunk an hour or an hour and a half of the anatomy into the day of their course. And so when they're doing, I don't know, hip openers or whatever, it's that day, here, teach the anatomy of the knee. And it's totally, it's so relevant to yoga. Since I wrote it and I'm a yogi, it's all of the examples and all of the work really relates to the yoga practice. So that's another thing that I do, is create curriculum that people can either rent or they could buy for lifetime access. Because, I've already trained with it. I've already tested it on students. They've been my guinea pigs. It's already ready to go. So if you want to just kind of show up and teach something, but you need the support to get there, that's another thing that I'm really excited about helping to create more for people. So you can just pop on over to my website and check it out. And I'm so happy to talk to anybody at any time, to, have an email exchange or chat on the phone and figure out whether or not what I do could be of service.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Shannon, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And hi to all of your listeners. Hello.
Yeah. Okay, connected yoga teachers, how are you feeling now about yoga teacher training? Are you thinking of it in a different way? Maybe you've never led a yoga teacher training, but you've thought of it. Maybe you've thought about leading workshops or retreats for yoga teachers. I think the most important takeaway that I have after talking to Rachel is that in the same way that I think of niching down, and you guys know I'm super passionate about finding your own unique niche, is that we can look at our offerings for yoga teachers in many different ways. It doesn't have to be a traditional yoga teacher training. Really look at what is your motivation. So Rachel had asked, what do I actually want to help people do? As the first question before you create something for yoga teachers, like a yoga teacher training. And how am I serving the world as a yoga teacher? Or how can I serve the yoga teachers that I want to work for or work with? But it's interesting. That is really how I look at the podcast, is How can I serve the yoga teachers that I work for? I had never thought about my own internal dialogue, but this is what motivates me to bring this content to yoga teachers every week. I look at the questions that yoga teachers are posting in our Facebook group, the questions that they have for me in our consultation calls or in emails, and that is what really drives the content of the podcast. So what content are you really passionate about? How would you like to help yoga teachers? So would you like them to have a week of retreat and self-care? Would you like to lead them through an experience? Or do you want to teach and train them so that they can teach something specific, like possibly a 200-hour, or I teach yoga for pelvic health to yoga teachers because I really want more people to have the opportunity to go to a pelvic health informed yoga class. The other thing that Rachel brought in is this difference between having an experience versus teaching to teach. I thought this was fantastic. And it brings me back to questioning my own goals in my yoga teacher trainings that I lead, as well as different yoga teacher training that I have attended or been a part of. It is really cool to be part of an experience and to learn something about yourself and to do something as a group. And at the same time, that is different. And I'm so glad that Rachel brought this forward. That is different than teaching someone how to teach. So thank you for that. That was something really good to think about. I think something else in here is that 60 to 70% of the yoga teachers, and they're not yoga teachers when they show up to Rachel, so they're students that are coming to a yoga teacher training, 60 to 70% of them are not intending to teach yoga. They're not signing up to teach yoga. They want to strengthen their yoga practice. And this really goes back to what Kimma Stark and I talked about on the podcast and what she really brought in when she wrote an article like What the World Needs Now is Not Another Yoga Teacher. And we did an episode called Too Many Yoga Teachers as a question. I will link to that show for sure. And so this is where we get into niching down. Not everyone needs to be leading a yoga teacher training. Maybe we're leading something that really facilitates someone's yoga experience. So I would love to start a group discussion on this to really brainstorm around this and just to see what different offerings we are putting out there. So feel free to continue this conversation in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group or send me an email. I think another key takeaway that I had was how Rachel talked about getting group discussion and interaction and brainstorming into a yoga teacher training. This is a really effective way to get students to use their own knowledge and learn and make mistakes in the yoga teacher training. So making mistakes is the best way to learn. I love when I'm teaching something and we go to do an assist. And if I just step back and let people think it through, giving an assist in this way is not going to work. They learn way more than if I jump in and tell them or stand and demo or stand and lecture. It's really the diving in that teaches us the most. Also, this reminds me of a recent pelvic health yoga teacher training that I was facilitating. It was in person, and a student asked me, is this better or is this better in terms of a pose? And I said, what do you think? And she was like, oh, I knew it. I knew you weren't going to give me an answer. She was joking. And I know that she was also frustrated. She was like, I want some concrete rules. And I was like, well, in movement, it is very hard to come up with concrete rules. So what does this pose feel like for you right now in this moment versus that pose? How does it feel different? Let's dig into the learning that we can pull out of it instead of me telling you what I think is the answer. So that is a fun little story, and it also relieves us as a facilitator from knowing all of the answers. We don't have to know all of the answers. We really are there to facilitate and hold space. Also, Rachel brought in an hour of content equals 4 to 10 hours of creation time. So that is something when you're looking at time blocking and creating a course. And I like that she talked about the money part of things, that it's around $3,000 for a 200-hour yoga teacher training. And I am guessing here that it's like $3,000 in US and in Canada. But what's interesting is you really need to start to look at the exchange rate for where you're going. I know this because I'm looking at teaching in Bermuda, and that's in Bermuda dollars, and a bit in the US and in Canada. So it needs to change, and you need to have it set for what you need to earn. When I do yoga teacher training, it's usually a 70-30 split. So 30% goes to the person who is hosting, so that's for the space. And sometimes they do registrations with that, although I like doing my own registrations, but they have the space there. And at different studios, they have different things. Some of them are an 80-20 split as well. Also, Rachel talked about 8 to 9 hours per day being kind of the limit. And it's interesting to see a group of students kind of fading, at different times, energy levels, and to really follow and learn as you go with that. And also, she touched on pacing your material and repeating the material. This is something that I think is probably my work from today's episode. Say it, do it, redo it, feedback and questions. That repetition is really part of learning. And that's something that I need to work on, I know, as a facilitator of a yoga teacher training. Last few notes here, and I just really wanted to summarize because there was so much goodness in this episode with Rachel, is asking yourself, what do I want students to know how to do, and how can I measure their skills? And in this, we're really looking at what are the learning objectives. So I think that's key when you're going to plan out a yoga teacher training or an event for yoga teachers. So I'm curious, connected yoga teachers, what's the one thing that you took away from today's interview? Share about that in our Facebook group. Talk about what your key takeaway was. Maybe you had a question about it. I would love to continue this conversation for sure. All of the links are in the show notes. So again, Rachel's website, we have that link, the link to the Kimma Stark episode, a link to Mama Nurture and all of my other courses, and also Janelle Allen, her episode where we talked about online courses, because I know a lot of you are starting to offer things online. Speaking of yoga teacher training, if you want to join me for the Yoga for Pelvic Health 20-hour yoga teacher training, it is happening in Meaford, Ontario, September 22nd and 23rd. And I'm super excited about it. It includes 20 hours of in-person training, a really comprehensive manual, information, and yoga flows. Go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look for training and events to get more information on that. So connected yoga teachers, I'm going to close out. I'll see you here next week when I am officially the mother of a 20-year-old and 2 teenagers. Let me know if you are also a mother, a parent, or if you have kids in your life, and share some photos of what you're doing this summer. Hit subscribe in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You could actually pause the episode right now and go and do that if you haven't already. Today's episode is possible because of our fantastic team. Thank you so much, Laura, Samantha, and Suzanne. This would not have happened without you. You know that. Okay, connected yoga teachers, stay connected to self, to your practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.